Marcus Henderson had lived in the same small house on Cottonwood Road for 12 years, but it was only 10 years ago that everything changed. That was when Elena Yazzie moved into the adobe house next door, and his quiet world shifted on its axis. He remembered that first morning like it happened yesterday. The moving truck had pulled away, leaving behind a woman with long black hair braided down her back, standing in the desert garden that came with the property. She wore jeans and a simple blue shirt, nothing fancy. But something about the way she carried herself made Marcus forget to breathe for a moment. Elena was Apache, he learned later from old Mrs. Chen at the grocery store. She had come from the reservation to take a job at the local elementary school, teaching 3rd grade. Mrs. and Mrs. Chen had a way of knowing everything about everyone in their small Arizona town, and she shared the information freely with anyone who would listen. Marcus was a man of few words on his best days. He worked as a mechanic at Rodriguez Auto Repair, came home covered in grease and tire dust, and spent his evenings reading or working in his small vegetable garden. He had never been married, never really had a serious girlfriend, and at 35, he figured that ship had sailed. He was content with his simple life, or at least he thought he was, until Elena moved next door. The first year, he barely saw her except for quick glimpses as she left for work in her old red pickup truck or when she tended to her garden in the early morning hours. Their properties were separated by a low stone wall that was more decorative than functional. But it might as well have been the Great Wall of China for all the courage Marcus could muster to cross it. He would watch from his kitchen window as she worked with plants he didn't recognize, desert flowers and herbs that seemed to thrive under her care. She moved with purpose and grace, her hands gentle but confident as she pruned and watered. Sometimes she would sing while she worked, soft melodies in a language he didn't understand but found beautiful anyway. Marcus had grown up in this town, born and raised among the mix of Mexican, Anglo, and Native American families that called the high desert home. He thought he knew everyone and everything about this place, but Elena brought something new, something he couldn't quite name. She carried herself with a dignity that impressed him and intimidated him in equal measure. The second year brought small changes. Elena added a chicken coop to her backyard, and Marcus would hear the soft clucking of hens in the morning. She built it herself, he noticed, watching from his back porch as she measured and hammered and painted the wooden structure a warm turquoise blue. He wanted to offer help, but couldn't find the words or the courage to approach her. By the 3rd year, Marcus had established a routine of careful observation that he told himself was not stalking, just neighborly awareness. He learned that Elena left for work at 7:15 every morning, always with a large coffee mug in her hand and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She returned around 4 in the afternoon, usually stopping to check her mailbox before disappearing into her house. On weekends, she worked in her garden or sat on her back porch reading. Sometimes her grandmother visited, an elderly woman with silver hair who arrived in a battered blue sedan and stayed for hours. Marcus could hear their voices carrying on the desert breeze, a mixture of English and what he assumed was Apache, the cadence of their conversation musical and warm. The 4th year brought the drought, and Marcus watched Elena's garden struggle despite her careful attention. His own vegetable plot was suffering too, but he had a deeper well and better irrigation. One evening, as he watered his tomatoes and peppers, he saw Elena standing by her fence, looking at her wilting plants with obvious concern. For 30 minutes he stood there holding his garden hose, wanting desperately to offer to share his water, but paralyzed by his own shyness. By the time he worked up the nerve to approach the fence, Elena had gone inside. Marcus cursed his cowardice and went to bed angry with himself, a feeling that was becoming far too familiar. The 5th year brought changes to both their routines. Elena started running in the early mornings, her footsteps rhythmic on the gravel road past their houses. Marcus began timing his own morning routine to coincide with her runs, not to intercept her, but just to see her as she passed his front window. She ran with an easy stride, her breathing controlled and steady, and she always waved at Mrs. Patterson, who sat on her porch with her morning coffee. Marcus wondered if Elena ever noticed him in his kitchen window, whether she was aware of his existence at all. They had never spoken, never even made eye contact, though they had been neighbors for 5 years. He started to think of her as a beautiful ghost who haunted his daily life in the best possible way. The 6th year brought tragedy to Elena's life. Marcus watched from his living room window as strangers arrived at her house one gray October morning, their faces somber and their embraces long. Later, he learned from Mrs. Chen that Elena's father had died, a man who had been a respected elder on the reservation and a teacher before her. For 2 weeks, Elena's house stayed quiet and dark except for the visitors who came and went at odd hours. Marcus wanted desperately to do something, to offer condolences or help, but he had never even introduced himself. How could he approach her in grief when he had been too cowardly to approach her in ordinary times? Instead, he left things. Small things, anonymous things. A bag of tomatoes from his garden on her front steps. A cord of firewood stacked neatly by her back door while she was away. Fresh eggs from the Gonzalez farm placed carefully in a basket by her mailbox. He never left notes, never identified himself, just tried to help in the only way he knew how. The 7th year passed quietly. Elena seemed to find her footing again after her father's death, though Marcus noticed a new sadness in the way she moved through her routines. She still sang in her garden, but less often. She still ran in the mornings, but her pace was different, less joyful somehow. Marcus wished he could do more than leave anonymous gifts, but wishing and doing were 2 different things entirely. The 8th year brought new life to Elena's property in the form of 3 horses. Marcus woke one Saturday morning to the sound of whinnying and discovered that Elena had built a small corral behind her house and acquired 3 beautiful animals, a bay mare, a paint gelding, and a young black horse that seemed full of energy and mischief. Marcus knew nothing about horses, but he found himself fascinated by Elena's interactions with them. She moved around the animals with complete confidence, grooming them and exercising them with the same grace she brought to everything else. Sometimes she would ride the bay mare out into the desert behind their houses, disappearing for hours before returning with wind-blown hair and what looked like peace on her face. The 9th year brought the realization that Marcus was in love, truly and completely, with a woman he had never spoken to. It was a ridiculous situation, he knew, but he couldn't seem to change it. Elena had become part of his daily life, part of his sense of home and belonging, even though they remained strangers. He started reading about Apache culture, checking out books from the library and spending his evenings learning about traditions and history he had never bothered to understand before. He learned about the importance of family and community, about respect for the natural world, about survival and strength and the deep connections between past and present. The more he learned, the more he admired Elena, and the more intimidated he became. The beginning of the 10th year brought an ice storm that knocked out power to half the town for 3 days. Marcus had a generator and plenty of supplies, but he worried about Elena's horses and whether she had enough feed and warm shelter for them. On the 2nd night of the outage, he lay awake listening to the wind and making plans to check on her animals in the morning, neighbor to neighbor, crisis giving him the excuse he had never found in ordinary times. But when morning came, Marcus discovered that Elena's power had come back on during the night, and she was already outside caring for her horses, breaking ice off their water trough and spreading fresh hay in their shelter. She moved efficiently despite the cold, wearing a thick coat and warm boots, her breath visible in the frigid air. Marcus was standing at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching Elena work and gathering courage to go outside and finally introduce himself, when she looked up and saw him. For the first time in 10 years, their eyes met directly. Elena raised her hand in a small wave. and Marcus lifted his coffee mug in response, his heart hammering in his chest. That simple exchange lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like everything had changed. Elena had noticed him. After 10 years of silent observation, careful distance, and anonymous kindness, she had finally looked at him and acknowledged his existence. Marcus stood at his window long after Elena had finished with her horses and gone back inside, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, Marcus was working in his garage when he heard footsteps on his gravel driveway. He looked up from the engine he was rebuilding to see Elena walking toward him, carrying something in her hands. She moved with purpose, but also with what looked like nervousness, and Marcus felt his throat go completely dry. She stopped a few feet from his workbench and held out a plate covered with a clean dish towel. "I'm Elena," she said, her voice warm and slightly hesitant. "I live next door." "Marcus," he managed to reply, wiping his greasy hands on a rag before accepting the plate. "Nice to meet you." Elena smiled, and Marcus thought his knees might actually give out. "I made extra bread this morning," she said. "Thought you might like some. It's fry bread, traditional recipe from my grandmother." Marcus looked down at the plate, then back at Elena's face. "Thank you," he said. "That's very kind." "I've been meaning to introduce myself for years," Elena said, and there was something in her tone that made Marcus wonder if she had been as aware of him as he had been of her. "Life gets busy, you know." "Yeah," Marcus said, though his life had been anything but busy, careful, cautious, and cowardly, but not busy. Elena shifted her weight slightly, and Marcus realized she was waiting for him to say something else. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but full of possibilities he didn't know how to navigate. "I've seen you working in your garden," she said finally. "You grow beautiful vegetables." "Thank you," Marcus said again, feeling like an idiot for his limited vocabulary. "Your garden is beautiful, too. All those desert flowers. I don't know how you make them grow so well." Elena's smile widened slightly. "My grandmother taught me. Desert plants are tough, but they need the right care. Like people, I guess." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak without saying something foolish. Elena seemed to understand his silence, though because she didn't rush to fill it with nervous chatter. "Well," she said finally, "I should let you get back to work. Enjoy the bread." "Wait," Marcus said, surprising himself with his boldness. "Would you like some tomatoes? I've got more than I can use, and they're really good this year." Elena's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I would love some tomatoes. Mine didn't do well in the heat this summer." Marcus led her to his garden, hyper-aware of Elena walking beside him, the first time she had been on his property in 10 years of living next door. He filled a paper bag with his best tomatoes, choosing each one carefully and handling them gently. "These look perfect," Elena said, accepting the bag. "Thank you, Marcus." The way she said his name made something warm unfold in his chest. They stood there in his garden for a moment, Elena examining his neat rows of vegetables and Marcus watching her take in his small domain. "You take good care of everything," she said, and something in her tone made Marcus think she meant more than just plants. "I try," he said, which seemed inadequate but true. Elena nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I should head home," she said. "Thanks again for the tomatoes." Marcus watched her walk back to her own property, noting how she moved with the same grace he had observed from a distance for so many years. At the low stone wall between their yards, she turned back and waved, and Marcus raised his hand in response. That night, Marcus ate Elena's fry bread with dinner and thought it was the best thing he had ever tasted. Not because it was technically perfect, though it was very good, but because Elena had made it with her own hands and brought it to him. After 10 years of watching from afar, She had finally crossed the invisible barrier between them and offered friendship. Marcus lay awake for hours that night, replaying their conversation and wondering what would happen next. For the first time in a decade, he had hoped that his careful patience might have been leading somewhere after all. Elena had noticed him, spoken to him, smiled at him. It was a beginning, small but real, and Marcus fell asleep thinking about tomatoes and fry bread and the sound of his name spoken in Elena's warm voice. The morning after Elena brought him fry bread, Marcus woke up earlier than usual with nervous energy coursing through his veins. He had lain awake most of the night thinking about their conversation, analyzing every word and gesture, wondering if he had imagined the warmth in her voice when she said his name. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table, watching Elena's house through the window as he had done countless times before. But today felt different. Today he wasn't just watching a beautiful stranger go about her morning routine. Today he was watching his neighbor Elena, who made incredible fry bread and had smiled at him like he mattered. When Elena emerged to feed her horses, Marcus found himself moving toward his back door before he consciously decided to do so. He grabbed the empty plate she had brought him the day before, rinsed and dried it carefully, and walked across his yard to the stone wall that separated their properties. "Good morning," he called out, holding up the clean plate. Elena looked up from where she was filling the horse's water trough and smiled. "Good morning, Marcus. How was the bread?" "Amazing," Marcus said honestly. "Best I've ever had." Elena's smile widened as she walked over to accept the returned plate. "My grandmother would be pleased to hear that. She taught me the recipe when I was 7 years old." "7?" Marcus asked. "That's pretty young to be cooking." "Apache children learn responsibility early," Elena said, leaning against the stone wall. "My grandmother believed that everyone should know how to feed themselves and others. Food is love," she used to say. Marcus nodded, thinking about his own grandmother who had taught him to change oil and rotate tires. "My grandmother taught me to fix cars. She said everyone should know how to take care of their tools." "Wise women," Elena said. "Both of them." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Elena's horses move around their corral. The bay mare came close to the fence, eyeing Marcus with intelligent brown eyes. "That's Sage," Elena said, following his gaze. "She's the boss of the other two. Don't let her sweet face fool you." "She's beautiful," Marcus said. "They all are. I don't know anything about horses, but I can see they're well cared for." "Would you like to meet them?" Elena asked. "I mean, if you're not in a hurry to get to work." Marcus glanced at his watch. He didn't need to be at the shop for another hour, and Rodriguez wouldn't mind if he was a few minutes late. "I'd like that very much." Elena led him through the gate into her backyard, and Marcus felt like he was entering a different world. Elena's property was larger than his, and she had transformed it into something that seemed to blend the desert landscape with careful cultivation. Native plants grew alongside vegetables and herbs, and everything seemed to have its place and purpose. "This is incredible," Marcus said, looking around. "It's like a little ranch." "That was the idea," Elena said. "I wanted a place where I could live the way my grandparents did, connected to the land but also practical. The horses were my father's idea, actually. He said Apache people are meant to have horses." Marcus heard something in her voice when she mentioned her father, a sadness that made him remember the visitors who had come to her house 2 years ago. He wanted to say something comforting but didn't know what words would be appropriate. Elena seemed to read his thoughts. "He died a couple of years ago," she said simply. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said you could judge a man by how he treated his tools and his land." Marcus felt a warm flutter in his chest at the idea that Elena's father might have approved of him. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "I saw people coming to visit you during that time. I wanted to help somehow, but I didn't know how." Elena turned to look at him directly, her dark eyes searching his face. "You did help," she said quietly. "The tomatoes, the firewood, the eggs. I knew it was you." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I didn't want to intrude, but I thought you might need—" "It was perfect," Elena interrupted. "It was exactly what I needed. Kindness without expectation. Help without having to ask for it. That's a rare gift, Marcus." They stood looking at each other across the space between them, and Marcus felt something shift in the air around them. Elena's expression was soft and grateful, and Marcus realized that his anonymous gifts had not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. "How did you know it was me?" he asked. Elena smiled. "The tomatoes were a clue. I had seen your garden, and those were the same variety you grew. But really, I just knew. You have a careful way of doing things. Everything placed just so, nothing wasted or careless. The firewood was stacked exactly the way my father used to stack ours." The paint horse came over to investigate the conversation, nudging Elena's shoulder with his nose. She reached up to scratch behind his ears, and the horse leaned into her touch with obvious affection. "This is Storm," she said. "He thinks he's a lapdog." Marcus reached out tentatively, and Elena guided his hand to the horse's neck. The animal's coat was warm and soft, and Marcus could feel the powerful muscles beneath the skin. "He's amazing," Marcus said. "They all are. Do you ride them often?" "Most mornings before work," Elena said. "And on weekends I take longer rides out into the desert. It's my meditation, my way of staying connected to something larger than myself." "I've seen you heading out," Marcus admitted. "It always looks so peaceful." Elena gave him a considering look. "Have you ever ridden a horse?" "Never," Marcus said. "City boy, basically. Well, small-town boy, but you know what I mean." "Would you like to learn?" Elena asked. "I could teach you if you're interested." Marcus felt his heart speed up. The idea of learning something completely new, something that mattered to Elena, both excited and terrified him. "I'd like that," he said, "but I should warn you. I'm probably too old to learn something like that." Elena laughed, and the sound was like water over stones. "Marcus, you're what, 40? You're not exactly ancient. Besides, horses don't care about age. They care about attitude and respect." 38, Marcus corrected, "and I have no idea what my attitude toward horses is since I've never been around them." "We'll find out together," Elena said. "How about Sunday morning, early before it gets too hot?" "Sunday morning," Marcus repeated, trying to sound casual while his heart hammered in his chest. "It's a date. I mean, an appointment, a lesson." Elena's smile was gentle and perhaps a little amused. "It's whatever you want it to be, Marcus." The rest of that week passed in a strange state of anticipation for Marcus. He found himself distracted at work, thinking about horses and Elena, and the fact that she had known about his anonymous gifts all along. He read everything he could find online about basic horse safety and riding techniques, wanting to be prepared, but also knowing that no amount of reading would substitute for actual experience. Friday evening, as Marcus was working in his garden, Elena appeared at the stone wall with a cup of coffee in her hands. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I've been inside grading papers all afternoon, and I need some fresh air." "Please," Marcus said, gesturing toward a wooden crate he sometimes used as a seat. "Coffee smells good." "It's terrible coffee," Elena said, settling onto the crate. "I'm a teacher, not a barista, but it's caffeinated, which is what matters." Marcus continued weeding around his tomato plants, hyper-aware of Elena's presence, but trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the desert evening settling around them with its particular blend of cooling air and lingering warmth from the day. "Tell me about being a mechanic," Elena said eventually, Do you like it? Marcus considered the question seriously. Yeah, I do. There's something satisfying about diagnosing a problem and fixing it. Cars are logical mostly. If you understand how they work, you can usually figure out what's wrong and make it right again. That's how I feel about teaching, Elena said. Every child is a puzzle, but if you take the time to understand how they learn, you can usually find a way to reach them. You teach third grade? 8- and 9-year-olds, Elena confirmed. Best age, in my opinion. Old enough to have real conversations, young enough to still think learning is magic. Marcus smiled at the description. Sounds like you love it. I do. Even the difficult days. Especially the difficult days, actually. Those are the ones where you earn your pay. They talked until full darkness fell, ranging from work to books to the peculiarities of small-town life. Marcus found Elena easy to talk to, interested in his opinions and willing to share her own. She had traveled more than he had, spending summers during college working at national parks and learning about different tribal communities across the Southwest. I wanted to understand how other Native communities lived, she explained. Apache ways are not the only ways, and I thought teaching would be better if I understood more perspectives. That makes sense, Marcus said. I've never really traveled. Never had much reason to, I guess. Travel isn't about reason, Elena said. It's about curiosity, about wanting to see how other people solve the problems of living. Marcus thought about that as Elena said goodnight and walked back to her own house. He had never thought of himself as particularly curious about other ways of living, but Elena's perspective made him wonder what he might have missed by staying in one place his whole life. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear, with temperatures that promised another scorching day once the sun climbed higher. Marcus showed up at Elena's corral at 7 o'clock, wearing his newest jeans and his most broken-in boots, feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. Elena was already there, brushing the bay mare with long, rhythmic strokes. She wore faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, her hair braided back in a single plait that hung down her back. "Ready for your first lesson?" she asked, smiling at Marcus over Sage's back. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus said. "What do I do?" "First, you meet Sage properly," Elena said. "Come here slowly and let her see your hands." Marcus approached the mare cautiously, following Elena's instructions to move calmly and speak softly. Sage regarded him with intelligent eyes, her ears forward with interest rather than alarm. "She likes you," Elena said. "That's a good start. Now let me show you how to saddle her." For the next hour, Elena walked Marcus through the basics of horse care and safety. How to approach a horse, how to read their body language, how to put on a saddle and bridle. Marcus was surprised by how much there was to know before he even got close to riding. "Horses are prey animals," Elena explained as she adjusted the stirrups for Marcus's longer legs. "They're naturally cautious, but they're also generous. If you respect them and show them you're trustworthy, they'll take care of you." When Marcus finally mounted Sage for the first time, sitting in the saddle while Elena held the reins, he felt like he was perched on top of a mountain. The ground seemed impossibly far away, and every movement the mare made felt amplified and significant. "Breathe," Elena said, her hand resting on his knee. "She can feel your tension. Try to relax and trust her." Marcus took a deep breath and tried to follow Elena's advice. Gradually, he began to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath him, the way her muscles moved and shifted as she walked slowly around the corral with Elena leading her. "How does it feel?" Elena asked. "Terrifying and amazing," Marcus said honestly. "Like I'm borrowing something I don't deserve." Elena's laugh was warm and understanding. "That's exactly right. You are borrowing something precious. Horses don't have to carry us, they choose to. That's what makes it special." They spent another hour working on basic riding skills, with Elena teaching Marcus how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse to stop and go, how to balance in the saddle. Marcus was sweating and sore by the time they finished, but he felt like he had accomplished something remarkable. "You did well for your first time," Elena said, as they untacked Sage together. "Natural seat, good instincts. Sage liked you." "She did the work," Marcus said. "I just tried not to fall off." "That's more than some people manage," Elena said. "Would you like to try again next week?" Marcus nodded eagerly, then caught himself and tried to look more casual. "If you don't mind teaching a slow student." "I don't mind at all," Elena said. "In fact, I'm looking forward to it." As Marcus walked back to his own property, he could still feel the motion of the horse beneath him, still feel the sun on his shoulders and the weight of Elena's approval. For the first time in his adult life, he was learning something completely new, something that challenged him physically and mentally. More importantly, he was learning it from Elena, sharing an experience that mattered to her. That evening, as Marcus sat on his back porch, nursing a beer and a collection of new bruises, Elena appeared at the stone wall with 2 plates of food. "Leftover stew," she said. "Figured you might be too tired to cook after your first riding lesson." Marcus accepted the plate gratefully, realizing he was indeed too tired and sore to think about making dinner. They sat on opposite sides of the wall, eating Elena's stew and watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "This is delicious," Marcus said. "You're going to spoil me with all this good cooking." "My grandmother always said that food tastes better when it's shared," Elena replied. "I've been cooking for one for so long I'd forgotten that was true." They ate in comfortable silence, and Marcus thought about how natural this felt, how right it seemed to be sharing a meal with Elena after sharing the morning learning something new. He was sore and tired, but he was also happier than he had been in years. "Thank you," he said as they finished eating. "For the lesson, for the food, for all of it." Elena smiled, gathering up the empty plates. "Thank you for being brave enough to try something new. Not everyone would have been willing to trust a horse on their first day." "I trusted you," Marcus said without thinking, then felt his face heat up at the admission. Elena's expression softened, and she reached across the wall to touch his hand briefly. "That means more to me than you know," she said quietly. As Elena walked back to her house, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about trust and patience, and the way 10 years of watching from a distance had led to this moment of connection. Tomorrow he would wake up sore, but looking forward to the next Sunday, the next lesson, the next conversation with the woman who had finally noticed him after all these years of careful waiting. 3 months passed in a rhythm that Marcus had never experienced before but now couldn't imagine living without. Every Sunday morning brought another riding lesson with Elena, and gradually Marcus progressed from clinging desperately to the saddle horn to actually steering Sage around the corral with something approaching confidence. Elena was a patient teacher, never pushing him beyond what felt safe but always encouraging him to try a little more. She taught him about horse psychology and desert riding, about the way Apache people had traditionally worked with horses not as masters, but as partners in survival. "My great-grandfather could ride before he could walk properly," Elena told him one Sunday as they groomed Storm together after a lesson. Horses weren't pets or hobbies for Apache people. They were freedom, mobility, the difference between life and death sometimes. "Do you think about that when you ride?" Marcus asked, running the brush carefully along Storm's neck the way Elena had shown him. "Always," Elena said. "Every time I'm on horseback, I'm connected to all the people who came before me. It's like carrying on a conversation that started generations ago." Marcus thought about that often during the weeks that followed. He had never felt connected to anything larger than himself, never considered his daily life as part of a longer story that stretched back in time and forward into the future. Elena's perspective on tradition and continuity was opening up ways of thinking he had never considered. Their friendship had grown beyond the Sunday lessons. Elena often stopped by his garage in the evenings when she heard him working, bringing coffee or cold water depending on the weather. Marcus had fixed her truck's air conditioning and replaced the worn brake pads, refusing payment and enjoying Elena's gratitude more than any paycheck. In return, Elena shared vegetables from her garden and stories about her students. Marcus loved hearing about the third graders who struggled with math but excelled at art, or the shy girl who had finally found the courage to read aloud in class. Elena brought the same patience and understanding to teaching that she brought to everything else, and Marcus found himself falling deeper in love not just with Elena but with the person she was in all aspects of her life. The shift from friendship to something deeper happened gradually, so slowly that Marcus wasn't sure exactly when he started thinking of Elena as more than just his neighbor and riding instructor. It might have been the evening she fell asleep on his couch after a particularly exhausting day at school, and Marcus found himself watching her peaceful face in the lamplight and thinking about how right she looked in his living room. Or it might have been the morning he woke up to find Elena already in his garden, picking tomatoes for both their breakfasts while her coffee cooled on his back steps. She looked up when she saw him at the kitchen window and waved, and Marcus felt something settle into place in his chest, like a key finding the right lock. But the moment Marcus was sure that his feelings had changed from admiration to love was the day Elena's grandmother came to visit and Elena brought her over to meet him. "This is Marcus," Elena said, leading a tiny woman with silver hair and bright, intelligent eyes toward his garage where he was working on Mrs. Patterson's sedan. "The neighbor I've been telling you about." Elena's grandmother, who introduced herself as Helen Yazzie, looked Marcus up and down with the appraising gaze of someone who missed nothing. She examined his tools, his workspace, the careful way he had organized everything for maximum efficiency. "You take care of your things," she observed in English that carried the rhythms of Apache underneath it. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, suddenly feeling like he was back in third grade himself. "Elena says you're learning to ride," Helen continued. "Apache horses." "Elena's been teaching me," Marcus said. "I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm learning." Helen nodded approvingly. "Learning is good, especially learning things that matter to the person teaching you." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but met Helen's steady gaze. "It matters to me too now." "I can see that," Helen said, and something in her tone made Marcus think he had passed some kind of test. That evening, Elena invited Marcus to join them for dinner, and he found himself sitting at Elena's kitchen table while Helen told stories about Elena's childhood and the old days on the reservation. Marcus listened with fascination as Helen described a world where people lived closer to the land and closer to each other, where everyone had responsibilities and everyone belonged. "Elena was always the one asking questions," Helen said, smiling at her granddaughter with obvious affection. "Why do we do this? Why don't we do that?" Sometimes I thought she would wear out the word why from so much use. "I was curious," Elena said defensively, but she was smiling too. "I wanted to understand everything." "Still do," Helen observed, glancing meaningfully between Elena and Marcus. "Some questions are worth asking, some answers are worth waiting for." Marcus went to sleep that night thinking about Helen's words and wondering if she had been talking about more than Elena's childhood curiosity. He had been waiting for 10 years, first for Elena to notice him and then for the right moment to approach her. Now he was waiting for something else, though he wasn't sure what exactly. The answer came 2 weeks later on a Sunday morning when Marcus arrived for his riding lesson to find Elena saddling both Sage and Storm. "Time for a real ride," she announced. "You're ready to go beyond the corral." Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "Are you sure? I can barely manage walking and trotting in a straight line." "You can do more than you think," Elena said. "Besides, Sage won't let you fall. She likes you too much." They rode out into the desert behind Elena's property, following trails that Elena said had been used by people and animals for hundreds of years. The morning was clear and cool, with the kind of crystalline air that made every detail of the landscape stand out in sharp focus. Marcus had never seen the desert from horseback, never experienced the way it looked when you were moving through it at the pace of an animal rather than the speed of a machine. Every plant and rock formation seemed more vivid, more present, as if he was seeing the world the way it was meant to be seen. "This is incredible," he said, as they rode side by side along a sandy wash bordered by mesquite and palo verde trees. "I knew you'd feel it," Elena said, her face bright with pleasure. "This is what I was trying to share with you, not just riding, but this connection to the land." They rode for 2 hours, stopping to rest the horses by a small spring that bubbled up from underground to create a pocket of green in the brown landscape. Marcus dismounted carefully, still awkward but more confident than he had been, and followed Elena's example in loosening the horses' girths and letting them drink. "My father used to bring me here when I was a child," Elena said, settling on a flat rock beside the spring. "He said this was a place where people had always come, Apache and others, because water is life in the desert." Marcus sat beside her, close enough to smell her shampoo and feel the warmth radiating from her skin after the ride. "It's beautiful, peaceful." "It's where I come to think," Elena said, "when I have decisions to make or problems to solve. Something about this place helps me see clearly." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze on the grass that grew around the spring. Marcus felt a sense of contentment he had never experienced before, a feeling of being exactly where he belonged at exactly the right time. "Marcus," Elena said eventually, her voice softer than usual, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," Marcus said, turning to face her. "Why did you wait so long?" Elena asked. 10 years is a long time to live next door to someone without saying hello." Marcus felt his throat tighten. This was the conversation he had been both hoping for and dreading, the moment when he would have to explain 10 years of watching and wanting and not knowing how to bridge the distance between them. "I was scared," he said simply. "You were so beautiful, so graceful, so clearly comfortable with yourself and your place in the world. I didn't know what I could possibly offer someone like you." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "What do you think you can offer me now?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. This felt like the most important question anyone had ever asked him, and he wanted to get it right. "Constancy," he said finally. "Reliability. Someone who pays attention to the small things and tries to help without being asked. Someone who will learn what matters to you and try to understand why it matters." "And love?" Elena asked quietly. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. "Yes, definitely love. More love than I knew I was capable of feeling." Elena smiled, and Marcus felt like the sun had come out from behind clouds he hadn't realized were there. "I've been waiting too," she said. "Not 10 years, but long enough, waiting for you to be ready to cross the distance between us." "I'm ready now," Marcus said. "More than ready. If you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Elena leaned over and kissed him, soft and warm and tasting like morning coffee and desert air. Marcus felt 10 years of careful patience and quiet longing resolve into this perfect moment beside the spring where people had always come to find what they needed. When they finally separated, Elena rested her forehead against his and smiled. "My grandmother likes you," she said. "She told me I'd be foolish to let you get away." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Marcus said. "She said something else too," Elena continued. "She said some things are worth waiting for, but once they arrive, you shouldn't wait any longer to claim them. Marcus kissed her again, longer this time, with 10 years of accumulated love behind it. When they broke apart, both horses had lifted their heads to watch them with what looked like equine approval. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked. "Now we ride home," Elena said. "Together. The way we should have been doing all along." The ride back to their houses felt different, charged with possibility and promise. Marcus no longer felt like he was borrowing Elena's time or imposing on her generosity. He felt like he was riding beside the woman he loved, the woman who loved him back, through the desert that was teaching him new ways to see and be in the world. That evening, they sat on Elena's back porch sharing a dinner Elena had cooked and Marcus had helped prepare. The horses grazed peacefully in their corral, and the desert stretched out around them in all directions, under a sky that was beginning to show the first stars. "I keep thinking about your grandmother's words," Marcus said, "about some things being worth waiting for." "She has a lot of sayings like that," Elena said. "Apache wisdom mixed with practical advice. But that one is true. The best things come to those who wait, but only if they're paying attention when those things finally arrive." Marcus reached for Elena's hand, intertwining their fingers. "I've been paying attention," he said. "Every day for 10 years. "I know," Elena said, squeezing his hand. "That's what made me notice you. Not just that you were watching, but how you were watching. With respect, with appreciation, with genuine interest in who I was rather than what you wanted from me." They sat holding hands in the gathering darkness, planning riding lessons and shared meals and the gradual merging of two lives that had been lived separately for too long. Marcus thought about the man he had been 10 years ago, lonely and afraid to risk rejection, and marveled at how patient love and careful attention had transformed him into someone brave enough to claim happiness when it finally presented itself. "Thank you," he said to Elena as they prepared to go inside. "For what?" "For noticing me," Marcus said, "for giving me a chance, for teaching me about horses and patience and what it means to be connected to something larger than myself." Elena smiled and kissed him one more time under the desert stars. "Thank you for waiting," she said, "and for being worth the wait." As Marcus walked back to his own house that night, he realized that 10 years of silence had led to this moment of perfect understanding. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new discoveries, new ways of being neighbors who had become friends, who had become something deeper and more lasting than either of them had dared to hope for. The boy who had been too shy to speak to the beautiful woman next door had grown into a man who could love her openly and honestly, and the woman who had seemed so far above him had turned out to be someone who valued the very qualities he had always possessed: steadiness, kindness, and the capacity to love patiently and well. Marcus fell asleep that night thinking about horseback rides and shared meals and the way Elena's hand felt in his, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't need to wonder what tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow would bring Elena, and that was more than enough.